August the 4th, Adolf Hitler flew to Army Group Center's headquarters at Borisov, east of Minsk. By now, he had lost faith in battles of encirclement and had begun to believe that he could best defeat the Soviet Union by inflicting severe economic damage. That meant making better progress in the south to cut off Russia's oil, and in the north, the speedy capture of Leningrad. He had come to Minsk to tell the commander of Army Group Center, Field Marshal von Bock, that his drive east towards Moscow was to be stopped, and his tanks were to be sent to Leningrad and the Ukraine. Hitler's plan involved sending the armor on 300-mile detours. The panzer generals, Guderian and Hoth, were appalled. Moscow was only 200 miles from the front, and most of the Red Army was deployed around the city. The generals were certain that only an attack there gave any chance of winning the war outright. However, Hitler was adamant, and a final desperate appeal by the Army Commander-in-Chief, von Brauchitsch, was rejected out of hand. Hitler complained that his generals knew nothing of the economic aspects of war. The panzers were to be diverted, and that was final. By mid-July, below the Pripyat marshes, the 6th Army of Army Group South, along with Panzer Group 1, had reached to within a few miles of Kiev. The armor had then swung south, while the advance from Romania, with the Romanian 3rd Army and the German 11th and 17th, pushed east. 3 Soviet armies were squeezed into a pocket near Uman. As the pocket was eliminated, the tanks turned north and crossed the Dnieper. Meanwhile, Guderian's Panzer Group 2 had driven south and crossed the river Desna, with 2nd Army on its right. The 2 panzer groups now threatened to trap 4 Soviet armies and parts of 2 more against the great bend of the river Dnieper. For its final thrust at Leningrad, 4th Panzer Group of Army Group North had, on Hitler's orders, been reinforced by tanks from Army Group Center. On August the 8th, the panzers broke through Soviet defenses, and while 16th Army attacked to the northeast, 18th Army cleared Estonia and advanced around Lake Peipus. By the end of August, Panzer Group 4 and 18th Army had penetrated to within 30 miles of Leningrad. Meanwhile, the Finns had pushed southeast on both sides of Lake Ladoga, reaching the old Finnish-Soviet frontiers. On September the 9th, Army Group North began a final push on Leningrad. Within 2 days, German soldiers were on the heights only 7 miles from the city, and artillery was pounding the inhabitants relentlessly. Hitler's latest orders were that Leningrad should not be stormed. The advance had severed all of its road and rail links to the rest of the Soviet Union, and the city was now to be bombed, shelled, and starved into submission. The Führer had changed the priorities of the campaign yet again. Leningrad could wait. Army Group North's tanks were to be sent to the center for an all-out drive on Moscow. It was the Soviet West Front, launching furious counterattacks with its ground and air forces, which had drawn Hitler's restless attention to the Moscow sector. The problem was that Army Group Center was in no position to launch an immediate offensive. It was only 13 days since most of the group's tanks had been sent on their marathon drives to the north and south. These operations, particularly the one around Kiev, had to be finished before Operation Typhoon, the assault on Moscow, could begin. The encirclement of Soviet forces in the south was achieved on September the 16th, when Kleist's Panzer Group 1 and Guderian's 24th Corps met at Lochwitze, 120 miles behind Kiev. For the Russians, a disaster of staggering dimensions now unfolded. The encircled Russian armies at Kiev did not give up easily. A savage battle in which the Soviets were hammered by artillery, tanks and aircraft had to be fought before the pocket was reduced. In the end, after 10 days of carnage, the Germans claimed 600,000 Red Army soldiers captured. No one knew how many had been killed in what Hitler called the greatest battle in history. After Kiev, for the first time since the invasion, the Red Army no longer outnumbered the Germans, and there were no more reserves. To defend Moscow, Stalin could field 800,000 men in 83 divisions, but no more than 25 of those divisions were fully effective, and there was a desperate shortage of armor and aircraft. On the German side, there were 2 million men in 70 divisions. Almost 1/3 of the divisions were mechanized, the highest proportion of mechanized units to infantry in any German attack of the war so far. Operation Typhoon, the drive on Moscow, began on October the 2nd. In front of Army Group Center were the Soviet West and Bryansk fronts. There was also a series of elaborate defense lines, up to 250 miles long, the first centered on Vyazma and the others on Mozhaisk. The first blow took the Soviets completely by surprise. Guderian's 2nd Panzer Army, returning from the Kiev battle, took Orel, a vital road junction 75 miles behind the first Russian defense line. 3 days later, the Panzers pushed on Bryansk, another communication center, while 2nd Army attacked from the west. 3 Russian armies were trapped. To the north, 3rd and 4th Panzer Armies threw their pincers around Vyazma, trapping another 5 Soviet armies. Moscow's first line of defense had been shattered in the opening blows, and the door to Moscow had been burst open. It was Stalin's insistence on manning defensive lines to the very end that made the situation at Bryansk and Vyazma so catastrophic. The pockets yielded 663,000 Russian prisoners, bringing the tally since the start of the invasion to 3 million. Once again, the German High Command allowed itself to believe that the war in